Here's Parks Associates' SmartTechCheck podcast with Mark Vina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, leader of the Parks Associates Smart Home Research Practice, and welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, where we cover all consumer tech topics that are smart home, home automation, security, and console gaming related, and much, much more. Today is Tuesday, August 17th, 2021. Lots and lots, as we usually do, to chat about. On our roster today, we're missing our one of our favorite journalists, Rob Peguerero. He's I don't know where the heck he is, but I think he's actually out earning a living, which really frustrating me that he actually made that decision to make a few bucks and ignore my podcast, but I'll forgive him. But we've got my two other trusty journalists on. We've got John Quain, who writes on technology for the New York Times and Tom's Guide, and Stuart Walpin, who writes for Twice and Techlicious. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mark.
And by the way, the Yankees are playing right now, and they are playing like
they're up 5-3.
Yes, they are just an exciting team. It's amazing what happens when you sign three big guys by the trading deadline. What can happen in baseball? Isn't it amazing, Stuart? I cannot.
I love the Field of Dreams game. That was just even though they didn't win the game, that was an astounding game.
That could be a podcast in itself, because I know a lot of folks. And I won't name. I know one particularly prominent journalist or former journalist who both of you know, who thought it was the cheesiest thing last year when I talked to him. Like, oh, the ML, why are they doing that? This is, I really thought it was very tastefully executed. I love that. I mean, the speech that James Earl Jones makes at the end is one of the great baseball.
Always gives me chills.
Yeah, it does. Anyway, we'll do a podcast about that separately. I'll make a note about that. But let's tee up today's topics. And, what I want to do here is kind of tee up, as I've done the last couple of weeks, a really interesting Park Associates factoid of the week. That's what's great about working for this firm. There's just lots and lots of wonderful data that we can opine on. And let me just start off with getting, Stuart, your reaction to this when you saw this. Did this surprise you in any way when you glanced at this before? 110 million. Our research indicates that 110 million U.S. Have over. There's 110 million residential and small business internet subscriptions as of the first quarter of this year, which really is a number.
What surprises me is not that number. That number doesn't surprise me. I think there are in the U.S. I think the last time I looked it was 120, either between 125 or 133 million households.
Mm-hmm.
So that number does not surprise me. What surprises me is the 77% of U.S. households, which means perhaps I'm underestimating the number of households. That almost a quarter of American households don't have internet connection. That surprises me. And when they were doing the digital transition in 2012, the estimate was that only 10% of TV viewers were still receiving their TV over the air. And TV is much less important these days, and certainly cable not as even big, and especially since all cable companies offer internet connectivity. That nearly 25% of American households don't have an internet connection. That stunned me.
Well, a lot of folks, there's still a reasonable portion of the population that live in very rural areas. They get 5G. Some of them, play with mobile hotspots, but those are not very reliable.
And fixed wireless is very, very expensive.
Right.
Well, Look where I'm sitting. I'm sitting in my car here in the country because there is no internet access here, and pretty much. Some of the towns now have some wired up, but if you don't live in a little town in Vermont, there's nothing, no cellular service, no internet access. So I'm surprised it's not higher than 20% too. But I think a lot of people use their smartphone though, so they do kind of have internet access when they're at work or they're grocery shopping or something else. But I wasn't totally surprised.
Well, before we hit the first topic, what's interesting about the hotspot issue is that now that I've been doing work with parks, I'm in Dallas all the time, and Dallas does actually have 5G coverage in a good portion of the area. And I'm in this wonderful Marriott hotel, and as you know, the internet access is not exactly great in many hotels. And I've been using my hotspot, and it's phenomenal. I mean, really,
Right.
you can dramatically feel the difference. And what's really weird about this is that, my main residence right now is in San Jose, the birthplace of Silicon Valley, and
Yeah.
coverage up there. You have to really go up to San Francisco, and it's even not that great in most parts of San Francisco. But it really is amazing. And the only other thing I'll wrap around that data point is that 77% figure, 71% figure we had on the slide, is that that's broadband with a very generous definition. So you could have very, very, what you and I, the three of us, would consider very low speed.
Right.
I think the federal definition of broadband is 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload, which is
shockingly slow,
insanely stupid.
Right. In fact, we have several clients that I'm actually doing a white paper on, and I won't tell you who they are, but that's the thing that just drives them crazy, because that from a requirement standpoint, I mean, that's like I want to say that's probably a 2005.
Right. There have been several consumer organizations that have been pushing the FCC to upgrade that definition, and they were knocking their heads against the wall during the last administration. Whether or not they'll be able to make any headway with the current administration remains to be seen. But I want to amend something I said. Maybe surprise was the wrong word about that 77% figure. Disappointed may be a better way of looking at it. And I think that the Recovery Act and what they're doing with infrastructure to expand broadband will hopefully act in a way that FDR's rural electrification program worked, that will cut that number down considerably. Hoping.
But Mark, to your clients though too, what it also says is there's room for growth. A lot of growth.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you've got that many people who aren't really online at home in any significant way, there's a lot of opportunity there.
No, that's exactly right. Because, and again, back to that whole 25.3 issue, is that and we could debate all day long what's the minimum speed the three of us think is really compelling. But there's so many interesting services that you can take advantage of, not just streaming movies and playing games and some of the obvious stuff. But when you have really, really good internet service, it opens up a whole range of applications and possibilities that you can't get.
And business opportunities for, the Disney Pluses, Apple TVs, and HBO Maxes of the world.
That's exactly right. Right. Let us go to the first topic here.
Absolutely.
This is really interesting because I had a conversation. I've been, Parks Associates is very, very much involved in the Matter initiative. It was kind of announced a couple of days ago that they're pushing that standard. At least they're not pushing, maybe a bad word, but certainly you're not going to see devices that support this brand new initiative, which is supposed to drive terrific baseline interoperability between Google Assistant, Amazon Alexa, and Apple HomeKit. And part of me is obviously a bit disappointed because as an analyst, Parks Associates feels very strongly that the industry needs this, to get people on the bandwagon. And right now the smart home, it's not exactly niche-y, but if you look at the data that we have, and I won't go into tremendous depth on this, but a lot of the data that indicates is that it's still kind of a high-end, not a high-end, but a sophisticated type of user who's outfitting their smart home. It hasn't become mainstream the way that we all like to think of that. And we believe that the standard is going to help that because, when you go to a Best Buy and you buy a smart home device and you don't know, the average person is not going to know, well, this works with Google Assistant, but it doesn't work with Amazon Alexa, or more frequently, it may not work with Apple HomeKit. Most users, they don't try to figure out a backup. They just go back to Best Buy or return it or send it back to Amazon. So, any thoughts on this? Because we think it's a big deal. Obviously, they want to do this the right way. So, kudos to the to the CSA for doing the right thing and not trying to rush this out the door. But I'd like to get Stuart, your opinion on this in terms of when you first heard of this. What was your reaction?
I didn't have any reaction. I wasn't surprised. You see a lot of these standards activities being delayed for one reason or another. And they talked about COVID-19, which quite frankly, when you're doing these sorts of standards, you have to get people in the same room together. So that didn't surprise me. The fact that they're trying to work that through, this is a Zigbee based operation. And you've got a lot of players who normally don't play nice together. But from the consumer side, it's disappointing is not the right word. I think so much of this relies, if and when it comes, on execution. I don't know when the last time either of you had gone shopping to like Lowe's or Home Depot or even a Best Buy, and you pick up a box that has a smart home or an IoT item in it. The number of initials and logos of different standards and compatibilities on the box is, I think, the primary reason most people pick up the box, look at it, and put it back on the shelf. It is, to me, and I sort of know what I'm looking at, the number of compatibilities that are listed on a box, I think, just scare consumers off immediately. And in terms of the execution of this, if they can get rid of all of those standards organizations that insist on having their logos on every smart bulb box, I think it would go a long way. If smart bulb matters, period. I don't want to see Google Assistant. I don't want to see Amazon Alexa. I don't want to see HomeKit. I don't want to see Zigbee. I don't want to see Z-Wave. I don't want to see anything else except it will work. And something on the box that tells me it will work with what I have. And not this ridiculous collection of logos and acronyms.
We call it NASCAR in the tech space, the NASCAR effect, where you've got logos all over the place. And it's interesting to point it out because Intel's got enough issues to deal with, so I don't want to go after Intel. But you got to recall that Intel was the founding father, so to speak, of getting the brand to stand out, Intel Inside, which, by the way, they paid the PC OEMs to do. There was a financial motivation in doing that, and most marketeers point at the Intel Inside logo as kind of the start of all this. But I agree with you, is that too many logos creates too much confusion. And by the way, Matter is supposed to be the good housekeeping seal, the one and only good housekeeping seal. So, John, I want to get your 2 cents on this.
Oh, I mean, this is it depends on how well it works. And having been on some standards committees where they sequester you in a hotel for a few days with a bunch of engineers and you all argue about what should be in the standard, that definitely takes a while. And this has got to be a bigger, it's not just the communication standards. So sorts of things I've worked on are kind of narrow: video, audio, and data, and that's all you're dealing with. This is everything you could ever think of, including literally the kitchen sink, right? Alexa works with the faucets and stuff. So, it doesn't surprise me it's going to take longer, but I also think we have a standard. It's called Alexa. It's over. As far as consumers are concerned, if it works with Alexa, it's good enough for me, and they plug it in and they're totally happy, it seems like. So, yes, could it be smoother and could everything integrate with, when I say, Alexa, I'm going to bed, and the whole house closes down and the TV turns off and cat food comes out into the bowl and all that stuff? That would be great, but I don't, that's going to be a while.
Yeah, and just to kind of put a bow on this is that, again, we've all been involved with initiative I've been involved in multiple initiatives over the course of my career, and I'm sure each of you have been monitoring those situations in a very curious way. But you never really know whether there's infighting going on, because that's what happens. You've got the senior executive teams that they sing kumbaya, they do the press conference, they do the press release, and everything looks great. And then when the working groups get together, which are rank and file engineers, then all of a sudden some interesting stuff happens. Now, I've been assured, because I've asked that question multiple times, that this is not, there really isn't anything like that. I think there is a collective view, a collective feeling at the surface level of all the big companies, the Apples, the Googles, and the Amazons. I think there's an appreciation that something has to be done if they want the category to go mainstream. However, we're sitting here in August of 2021. I'm not sure Matter is going to, have the traction it's looking for if it does another push.
Right.
Well, by the way, it's not 2022 now. It's late 2022. They've
Right.
got to get some devices out in early 2022 as proof points to make sure that this thing really has traction. So,
agreed, definitely.
let's hit that next topic if we could. Great. Now, John, and you're, just for the record, you're not in a Tesla, as far as I know.
I'm not in a Tesla.
But I'll let you talk to this, because this is really an important topic, and would love to get your 2 cents on it, and then I want to get Stuart to react.
Yeah, I mean, Tesla is definitely a problem in the automotive and technology business. They have been sort of, with a nod and a wink, pushing autopilot, which is not automatic and shouldn't pilot your car anywhere, as sort of a semi-autonomous system. And I say that with a nod and a wink because in the owner's manual online, and if you look up anything online, it says you're always supposed to keep your hands on the wheel and you're not supposed to use it on side streets, et cetera, et cetera. But not once in all the years that it's been available have they ever shut it off on any user, on any of those circumstances. And they love the fact that people post videos of themselves in the backseat of the car while it's driving down the street. Unfortunately, they do not have the technology necessary to do even autopilot, let alone make it autonomous. So it's probably time that the nits of people shut them down and say, okay, autopilot must be turned off, because they've killed, almost a dozen people now. They're running straight into emergency vehicles that my car that I'm sitting in would automatically stop and brake for every single time. Tesla can't seem to handle some basic, active safety system technology that every other automaker has. As these stories creep out, it makes people afraid of all the other semi-autonomous and on their way to being autonomous vehicles. So recently I was driving the Chevy Bolt EUV with Super Cruise in it, and it's a much more advanced system, a much safer system, and it's a true hands-off system. You can get on the highway, and it's designed to let the car drive without your hands or feet on the wheel, the only system of its type available now. And some of the other drivers, they were too afraid. They couldn't bring themselves to do it, right? Whereas I had it going for, an hour and 20 minutes on the highway. So I think this really could hurt, if they don't do something about Tesla, that could hurt everybody else.
Stuart.
This is going to sound completely off the wall.
I'm not surprised, Stuart. Go ahead.
But the talk of autonomous cars, I keep flashing back to the Magnificent Ambersons, the Orson Welles film.
Yep.
The Joseph Cotton character plays a car maker, and the Amberson family and the Tim Holt character, talks about how automobiles ought not to have been invented to begin with.
Right.
All technology is generational, especially transformative technologies. It always takes a generation for something really revolutionary to come into the market for it to become mainstream. And I think a lot of the autonomous vehicle, again, you're running into the Tim Holtz of the world, where they are used to being in a horse and buggy. And until that generation disappears, you have this inherent trust factor. In the same way that, for instance, our parents couldn't deal with a VCR. They couldn't figure out how the damn thing worked. And, in all generations, it's always the kids who had to come in and help their parents figure out what the new technology is. And autonomous vehicles is such a radical shift, in the same way that the car was a radical shift to replace the horse and buggy, that it's going to take some time for the younger generations who are used to more, I don't want to say autonomous, but more artificial intelligence, a larger trust in non-human systems, the acceptance of faster speed technologies and communications. All of those things factor into the acceptance of a technology this radical. So we're talking about this in 2021. In 2031, we may be up to Sleeper with Woody Allen riding around in that egg-shaped, car all by himself. It's not just the technology. If it was just technology, we would solve the problems. Will get solved because if you look at tech history, tech problems get solved. The problem is
but
human.
this is I think with Tesla though, the trouble is incompetency, right? You have an incompetent group in charge of this, and that's the real problem. And everybody else doing it well is
it's one company. It's one company.
Right. But unfortunately, they have this mind share. They're sucking all the oxygen out of the room. So they always ask, well, is it in a Tesla? Well, what about Tesla? It doesn't matter what you're talking about. You're talking about tires, and they go, what about Tesla? It's ridiculous. Well, so I think it could have a delaying factor on this technology when it's completely different from anybody. Everybody else is completely different from what they're doing. Everybody is different. No one is doing what Tesla's doing.
And we got to hit the next topic, but Stuart made a very interesting point: is that it really is a sea change. I mean, it's a dramatic change. Right. And I think that there's an entire the existing population have a difficult time wrapping their heads around it. I have to tell you that I have been in a Tesla test drive with people, and by the way, that I think they call it level 1 automation, which is basically you got to be on the highway. It allows us, it'll get you off to the exit, but you can't. It doesn't, drive the car completely. It's kind of a couple of baby steps in that direction. It terrified me. This was 2 years ago. The first time I'm on a major highway. I'm on I-280 in Silicon Valley, which is 5 lanes on each side during rush hour, and this guy enabled it, and I was, oh my God, the man does not have his hands on the wheel, And I think the interesting point that Stuart made is that there are baby steps you can get there from a technology standpoint that doesn't require you to turn off complete control to the automated system on the car. For example, they have them employed in cars today. Cars that if you're about to hit another car, self-braking kicks in. There are now features on cars that if you veer into another lane and there's another car there, it will self-correct and purposely drive away from a potential accident. To me, that's more accepting with most people. But this, what John is saying is a scary thing that Tesla right now is sucking out all the oxygen in the air because they're so well known in the category that there's just a general feeling that they're just not, from a technology standpoint, just don't have the right tools to get there. So anyway,
it only takes one guy to ruin it for all the rest of us, right?
Well, again, from a technological history point of view, in almost every major technological shift, there was always some big pioneer at the beginning that screwed up. I mean, in the computer age, Apple was this, and then collapsed. And was it going to take the and I go all the way back into the car industry to the Stanley Steamer. mean, the Edsel. I mean, there's very highly publicized failures in almost every new technology, but it has not slowed the inexorable adoption of that technology.
I think it's going to happen.
Only you can invoke Stanley Steamer and a discussion about self-autonomous driving. I mean, that's just why we love you. All right, let's hit the next topic.
That's our final topic, or is this our final topic?
We got one more after this.
Okay.
The last topic is going to be fun. Very quickly, Stuart, you teed this up earlier. It sounds like you had a personally bad experience with what. How did I know that? How did I know that? So tell us about your experience, because that will probably illustrate.
Well, it's actually two experiences. The first one is that I got hacked in the middle of 2020, and I'm still feeling the ramifications of it. And I'm a guy who is a belt suspenders kind of guy, and it still hit me. But John Oliver on this past Sunday night had his main segment was on ransomware, and I got a call yesterday from a guy I play poker with, a buddy of mine, who said that the segment scared the bejesus out of him. He did not use the word bejesus, by the way. And I have written about from a consumer point of view, antivirus software and keeping yourself safe online for a while now. And so I went through him the fact that you want to look at antivirus software and a VPN and changing all your passwords and getting a password manager and wrapping yourself in cellophane and throwing yourself into a closet and never coming out again. And it occurred to me as I was explaining all of this to him and him becoming either more confused or more scared, and all the work that he now had to do to protect himself, that not once have I ever heard from my own cable provider, Spectrum, about guarding the connection that they provide me. Nor have I heard, and I have tested a half a dozen different wireless mesh systems, I haven't heard from the Netgears or the the other ones, Eros of the world, about, again, how do I guard myself against these things? These places, it's sort of like when you buy a car. It comes with a manual. It tells you how to drive the car and what to do and what not to do. Why aren't we getting these instructions from the people selling us these services?
Right.
Why isn't there, other than Norton LifeLock, insurance policies against this sort of thing happening? We talked about laws last week and what the federal government can do to try to halt some of this stuff. But the antivirus people, they're fighting a losing battle. And the fact that we're left on our own to try to figure this out, and I'm talking not only the smart people, the people who theoretically know what the hell they're talking about, but just people like the guy I play poker with who had no idea that he shouldn't use the same password for multiple sites. How is this doesn't come as a manual when you get your connection or an ongoing service from the Spectrums, Comcast, and the other ISPs in the world?
Well, I sympathize with that completely. I can't think of a single situation, and I've been a Comcast customer. I should have mentioned their name, but it's too late. Comcast. And I have never gotten a proactive email or alert in 15 years that there was some type of threat. Now, having said that, there are some really good solutions out there. For example, with that, the phrase that you're kind of searching for, because it's now a thing, is called managed Wi-Fi, which is not just great mesh networking technology, which is terrific for great coverage in your home, especially if you get a lot of nooks and crannies. But when you allow a third party like a Plume, Minim is another good solution out there. They actually do a pretty good job, in terms of threat alerts. I mean, nothing is foolproof, but I think to me, when I recommend to someone, to families all the time, that what you ought to do is, if you try to think that the ISP is really going to go out of their way, and not that they don't want to do it, but for whatever business reason, they just feel as if maybe they feel that they can't be as effective. Maybe there's a liability issue, frankly, for them to even pretend to be effective. But the Plumes of the world, the Minims of the world, Norton used to have a great product called Core, which was their own router before they kind of got out of the security hardware business. But I agree with you, Stuart. This is a big issue, and I'm shocked by the number of friends and relatives that I have, that when they tell me they don't really tell me what their passwords are, but if I'm with them and they're typing in a password, your password is really password, or your password is the name of your dog. I mean, these password managers that are out there are really good. There's some very, very good ones.
Yes.
They're very inexpensive. They're like $5 a month or $50 a year for a lifetime subscription, whatever the deal is. And they just save you so much time, and not to get into a discussion of which one is better, because there's a number of good ones.
And a lot of the antivirus packages, in fact, most of them include a password manager. You can one-stop shop for an antivirus program that includes password manager, VPN, and lots of other kind of safety features. But the information should not be, where can I find it? It should be in your face constantly from these people.
Yeah. John.
Yeah, well, the main reason they do it is because they have no exposure. They don't, for Spectrums and the Comcast of the world, it doesn't really matter what happens to you, if you get hacked or not, and there's no penalty to them. What's interesting, that difference is, suppose you take a look at the wireless side of things, right? they ignored it for a long time, and then they started having problems. And now Lookout and things like that are built into systems like wireless. You don't have Verizon Wireless. You don't realize it, but it's actually baked into it now. So they are doing something about it, but the Comcast and Spectrums of the world could care less. I mean, and they're not going to lose anything, and nobody's going to penalize them. But it certainly, it is such a problem that Stuart's right that there needs to be a much more wholesale sort of addressing of the problem. You can't just continue on like this. You can't complain, well, they shut down the food processing. Of course they did, because you didn't do anything about it, right, to prevent it. So it is kind of frustrating. Not kind of, it's a lot of frustrating. So, maybe we'll see more legislation about that coming. I don't know. I'm not very optimistic about it.
There are actually two pieces to this. The two pieces are the technical side, antivirus, VPN, password manager, and that sort of. But there's also the stuff that these companies wouldn't have theoretically liability over is behavior. Not using the same password multiple times, having multiple email addresses for different things, not clicking on attachments in emails from people you don't know, checking email addresses from things that even just looks. I mean, there are a lot of human behaviors that could put a stop to all of this that we could be warned about in a much more wholesale manner, aside from the technical stuff.
Yeah, but it's not up to us. It's not up to the consumer. It's not the consumer's fault, even though, all the attacks are aimed at them. But, I shouldn't have to check attachments in my email. That's just ridiculous that I have to do that. But look at, in the past couple of days, T-Mobile and Accenture. Embarrassing, just a little embarrassing for Accenture. Oh my goodness, right? Here I am consulting to enterprises and kerplooey.
Wasn't T-Mobile 100 million? I think it was a big 100 million. Think about that.
But this is strike number 3 for T-Mobile, right? This is the third time this has happened. So it's like, come on.
You almost have to look at it. I want to get to our last topic. You almost have to look at it in a almost kind of in an insurance type of way. In that, if you live in California, I live in California, you got to get, if you own a home, you got to get earthquake insurance. You may not like it, but you got to get a policy, and unfortunately that does not exist at the cyber level.
Right.
That may change though, because one day there's going to be a hack that's not just going to be the kind of hack where, that happened to another company that doesn't really affect me, it's bad. It's going to be a hack that affects a substantial portion of the population. I hope I don't say this, and it happens, and then people are going to get religion. It's like, I don't. Karma's going to hit me. Let's hit our last topic. This is a topic close to my heart.
Oh my God!
I know. Can you believe this? And the reason why I want to bring this up is that this is very close to my heart. I worked for IBM as an intern back in the early 80s when IBM had something called the IBM Product Centers. I'm sure you'll remember that. That was IBM's version of Apple stores. They had about 150 of them, and they were in very high rent areas. And the IBM PC came out right around when those stores appeared. And what's just amazing to me, because I think I was a junior in college. I was a junior at Boston College when this happened. To me, to this day, it also always shocks me how IBM had no idea what they had unleashed. I mean, I think the original forecast was like 100,000 units over 5 or 10 years, some crazy number. They just don't realize that when they got behind, creating a standard essentially, and you could always also talk about how they fumbled the business away with an entirely different podcast. But it just amazes to me, just looking back and it's 40 years ago, they just had no idea what they had, and it changed my life. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I got into the tech space. So, Stuart, you're nodding your head. Any nostalgic views that you have on the topic?
Oh, sure. I mean, I was working at the Star Ledger, and we were using a distributed system where there was this big mainframe back in the room, and everybody had these essentially dumb terminals that we typed our story on. And when these things first coming out, obviously the IBM PC is not the first PC. Obviously, the Apple II wins that battle. But this machine is. If IBM knew what they had, they would not have done it the way that they did it. Right. And they would be what Microsoft is now if they had not hired Microsoft to write the operating system. by taking all these off-the-shelf products and a third-party operating system, they just completely just opened the door for everybody to do an IBM clone and to essentially run them out of the hardware business, because everybody else who came up behind them had a better idea of what they were doing. And IBM was a big mainframe company, and they just saw this thing as a sidelight, as an interesting little piece to, to sell more hardware. If they had any vision of what the world was going to be, they definitely would not have done it the way that they did.
It's true. I think you nailed it, because when I was at IBM as a entry level salesperson, when you work at IBM at the beginning, you're always carrying a bag, so to speak. That was kind of the career trajectory. Is that they owe it in the early 80s. They viewed the IBM PC, most IBM salespeople and IBM people in general, as a threat to their much higher margin mainframe business. Display writer, I don't know if you remember the display writer, that was a distributed word processing system. And they were, remember, IBM was a leasing business. They were making tons of money, leasing mainframes, and all of a sudden now we got these $5,000 or $6,000 class systems that are not. No one's leasing that. They're buying that outright. And then, of course, Lotus 1-2-3 changed the entire game. That was kind of the application that forced you. That was the killer app.
Killer app.
And what are your thoughts, just reflecting on that magic 4 years?
The person who really lost out there was Mitch, right? Because it was like very nice guy, but Lotus 1-2-3. Yeah, it was weird, because when it came out, a lot of us looked at it because of a certain age, and we're like, yeah, but does it play Pong? It doesn't play Pong. I don't get this, right? So we were kind of looked at it as like, clunky, and who's going to want like an elaborate typewriter, until Lotus 1-2-3 came out, and then it was like, oh, now I get it. Yes. And IBM's decision not to enforce their patents is just the weirdest thing. I think they just thought it'll be more clients for mainframes or something, but and then Microsoft saying, well, they weren't even Microsoft then, saying, oh, yes, I told them we already have one. It was like the Monty Python joke, I told them we already have a Holy Grail. They didn't even have the operating system.
They didn't have it yet, right.
But they told IBM they did, right?
They were on that CPM path, right. I'll just close. My favorite story about IBM, when they were in that Boca Raton phase in the beginning, and they were kind of given this directive that, hey, you've got a year to get a product to market. And at IBM, that was, it was 5 years generally to get a product from the chalkboard to out to production, and everything was vertically integrated. You had to use IBM hard drive, fixed drives, and IBM parts, and they had to violate every rule that the IBM cookbook prescribed for bringing a product to market. And my favorite story is that when they approached Microsoft, when they finally said they got an operating system, of course, there's a whole story behind that. What's funny, humorous about that is when the IBM business people said, hey, listen, we'll pay you, I want to say it was like $300, back this is $1980, $300,000 for just to own the operating system, and we'll sell it individually. And Gates and Ballmer were influential, saying, we don't want that. Pay us on a per license basis. Pay us $30. And that turned out to be one of the great business decisions.
Huge deal.
Right. And by the way, IBM had to pay a license fee for every operating system that ended up on the phone, by the way. So anyway, this was really great. We got to do another story part about this, because there's so many great IBM stories. So John and Stuart, listen, thank you for taking the time to join me for today's podcast.
Absolutely.
Listening audience, please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons in YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Please visit Park Associates at www.parkassociates.com. And until next time, have a great week.